logic of DEI is the world is split between oppressors and oppressed and perpetrators and victims. And when you split the world that crudely and that incorrectly, the Jews are going to get the short end of the stick every single time. How do we know that? We know that because what was the great innovation of Israel? The great innovation of Israel was we will never be victims again. Right? Never. There's no virtue in being a victim. No virtue in being a victim. We will never be victims again.
Good evening, everyone. Just one more reminder to turn off your phones unless you're a doctor or have young children. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you to our guest, Marc Gerson, who will be speaking to us this evening. Marc Gerson graduated Yale Law School in 1998 and is the co-founder of the company's Gerson Lerman Group, GLG, and of the Interesting Investment Institute 3I members. He is also the co-founder and chairman of African Mission Healthcare, which partners with Christian missionary doctors at the Christian hospitals in Africa to provide clinical care, build infrastructure, and do training of African medical professionals, and of United Hatzalah of Israel, Israel's network of volunteer first responder medics. He is also the author of the 2021 national bestseller on the Haggadah, The Telling: How Judaism's Essential Books Reveal the Meaning of Life. He's also known as the evangelicals' Jewish best friend and teaches Torah to them every Tuesday. Since the October 7th massacre in the south of Israel, where Hamas terrorists infiltrated the border from Gaza into Israeli kibbutzim and into the Nova Music Festival, killing over 1,300 civilians and kidnapping more than 200, United Hatzalah volunteer medics have been at the front lines continuously treating and providing emergency medical response and supplies for wounded civilians, soldiers, and displaced families in Israel. They have treated more than 1,000 children, soldiers, and civilians. United Hatzalah volunteer medics were the first on the scene on the morning of October 7th, before knowledge of the events were widespread, and their work has been and continues to be incredible and essential as they treat enormous volumes of people. This evening is a dedication to the heroism reflected by Israel's first responders as they stand at the front lines amidst the war. Oh yeah, and now we're going to hear from Toby.
Everyone see me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Marc, for taking time out of your busy schedule to drive up to New Haven and join us for dinner. We are honored. And thank you all for coming here tonight. Truthfully, there is no other place for any of us to be other than right here. I've had the privilege of knowing Marc for over 25 years and consider you a dear personal friend as well as a longtime friend and supporter from the founding days of this society. Throughout your time here at Yale, and I speak to all of you here, you have met and will continue to meet people in leadership positions, serving roles in industry, politics, and education. Each individual will make an impact on you in different ways through the lens in which you see your life and the world around you. Some you will find more relevant and others not as much. There are many things I could say about Marc, but I would like to highlight a few that I know many of you will take as inspiration tonight. Marc, you are a humble man, so allow me to share a few words about how you inspire me. I remember the first time I saw you. There was an energy and a passion for life. Not just to succeed, because you were already successful when I met you. And besides, you never seemed satisfied with your business success. If anything, it was a sidebar to what you were really invested in. Even the breadth of your philanthropic endeavors didn't really give one the full scope of who you are. It was in the details of how you live your life that defines you, from opening your home and inviting in friends and strangers alike, to looking for an Eishes Chayil, a woman of valor, to be your partner in life, to deciding with great intention the names of your children, to devoting time and curiosity into learning Torah and discovering more and more about your identity as a Jew, and to develop that connection with Jewish tradition, to God, to your family, to the Jewish people, and ultimately the world around you. This week's Torah portion speaks about the chesed, kindness of Avraham Avinu, our father Abraham. The tent of Abraham and his wife Sarah had 4 doors, welcoming strangers into their home from whichever direction they were coming. Abraham stood for the steadfast commitment to truth against all odds and disseminated his message to bring the world to a better place, a godly place. Marc, your home that you share with Erica and your beautiful children, the uncompromising and holy work of Hatzalah, your sincere kindness to students right out of college, and your charitable work in Africa, among so much more, is a true testament to our ancestor Abraham. You exemplify the essence of what it means not just to be successful, but how to live successfully. And to the rest of my friends here tonight, it is this nugget of gold I wish for you to take home. What does it look like to live a truly successful life? Please listen very carefully to the next hour. It will change your life.
Oh, Mike, okay. Okay, good idea, okay. Okay, well, thank you, Julia, and thank you, Toby, and of course, Shmuley, for putting together such an incredible society after so many years, and it's such an honor to be here with everyone tonight. When did I meet you? It was 1999. I remember Corey told me that you got to meet this incredible rabbi in New Haven. And somehow I didn't meet you when I was here. I graduated in 98, and so you came to my office, and it's been a lifelong friendship now since I guess before many of you were born. Okay, so I'll talk about a few subjects, really focusing on United Hatzalah, because I co-founded it about 20 years ago, and it is really at the forefront in so many ways of what Israel's dealing with right now. And obviously stop for any kind of questions or comments, and we can make it interactive. And just before I conclude, whenever that is, I'm finishing, so Julia talked about my book, which came out 2.5 years ago, and how the meaning of life is revealed in the Haggadah. I'm finishing now my next book, which is about how modern social science has proven the Bible to be true, and I have a section on dating and relationships, so I can give you relationship advice from the Bible, which may be the most relevant thing. So even though it's slightly off topic, let's bring it on topic before the evening concludes. Oh, it's always on topic, okay. I'm just not sure how I'm going to fit it in. So if it doesn't fit in, just say, hey, remember the dating secrets from the Bible. Because the Bible gives instructions as to how to find your perfect spouse and how to live happily ever after with him or her. And the Bible's right there. Okay, anyway. Genesis 24. So as Shmuley said, I graduated law school in 98, and asked, was I involved with the Federal Society? And I was totally sympathetic politically, legally, but I was focused mainly on starting my business when I was at Yale Law School, and that was Gerson Group, GLG, which was the first peer network to help educate originally investors and now all manner of business people from corporations, certainly investors of all kinds in all asset classes, as well as consultants and law firms. And some of you who are in graduate schools may have been a customer or an expert of ours. And so it grew into, and it keeps growing into a pretty big business. And it's been very gratifying to see how many really huge numbers of people learn about whatever they're investing in or working on from the experts that we curate and arrange for them to consult with over the last 25 years. And so I started GLG in 98, and we were fortunate to be successful pretty quickly. And that enabled me to get involved in philanthropy and giving quickly. And I remember the first philanthropic gift I ever gave was Shmuley asked me to give $720. And I remember we were having lunch. Remember that kosher Chinese place on 52nd Street?
I remember the quote you gave in your office, Marc.
Yeah, that's it. But no, it's called Glot Dynasty. You bring me back 20 years, and Shmuley asked me to get $720, and I remember thinking, well, like, I can't give $720. And then Shmuley's like, yes, you can. I'm like, yeah, actually, I can. And so I want to credit you, Shmuley, with really starting me as a philanthropist. And so that was the first gift I gave. I don't remember when that was, probably 2000 or 2001. And then in 2002 or so, one of GLG's early clients said to me, will you meet Ellie Beer, who's coming in from Israel? And I said, yeah, whoever. It was a client, a friend. I said, of course, whoever you want. And so I met Ellie at, some of you may know of him, at Wolf and Lamb, which is 10 East 48th. And we met for dinner, and he said, you know how there are sirens in New York all the time from ambulances? And I said, yeah, of course. And he said, and the ambulances often get stuck in traffic. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, they get stuck in traffic after someone had called 911, often with an emergency that needs help within 3 minutes. Like if someone is choking, they need the item dislodged immediately, they're going to die. If someone's in an accident, they very well might bleed out unless they get help right away. Or if a woman's giving sudden birth, she needs someone by her side right away. Someone's having a heart attack or a stroke, their chances of survival diminish significantly for each minute when they're not treated. So what he basically said is, I have a vision for how we can decouple the emergency first response from the transport. Because ambulances are very good at transport, but if you're bleeding or choking or having a heart attack or a stroke, you don't need to be transported immediately. You need a trained and equipped first responder at your side within 3 minutes and often sooner. So it was all his vision. He had this vision that there would be a network of volunteer EMTs and then paramedics who would be all throughout the community, just doing whatever they're doing. Maybe they're at a dinner like this. Maybe they're in the office. Maybe they're at their construction job. Maybe they're asleep. And when one of their neighbors or someone in their proximity calls 911, or in our case 1221, we can immediately locate the closest first responder who will have been trained, equipped, and in the system, dispatch him or her to the victim, and begin treatment right now in cities within 90 seconds and nationwide within 3 minutes. And that was his vision. He and I started the organization together. It immediately struck me as a very efficient and effective way to save lives. And so we started it, and the technology really grew along with us. So the geolocation technology, which became really crucial, as well as all kinds of medical and first response technology. And so now we're doing about 1,900 calls a day. This is before October 7th, 1,900 calls a day. And I always look at philanthropy through one lens, which is ROI. In other words, how many lives can you save, or how much pain can you ameliorate per dollar invested? Very simple. And it's a calculation which anyone who deploys capital does and should make. When you invest in a business, you're thinking, how much money can I make as a result of this investment in what period of time? That's the only calculation. And people either make it instinctively, intuitively, or intentionally, but they always make it. So I try to do the same thing philanthropically. And so we're doing 1,900 calls a day. 6.9% of calls to 911 are what's called potential life-saving interventions. So those are the cases that need to be tended to immediately. So if you say we save about half the lives of those, which is probably about right, then some people die, some people will live anyway. So we save about half of them. And then you attribute, say, 15% of a life saved to every other call. And some of these are not serious. Some of these are someone's going to have brain damage but not die if not treated immediately. Sometimes it's a woman who needs help immediately in a gynecological emergency, so they vary in severity. But if you say each one of those is 15% of the life-saving call, it's about a little under $500 to save a life through United Hatzalah. So it's a spectacular investment. And therefore, my wife and I put as much money as we can, $4 or $5 million a year into United Hatzalah, because the investment is incredible. And we're trying to expand it to the U.S., and we can get into why that hasn't worked nearly as well as it should or we would have liked, and the one place where it seems to be taking off. But we can get into that later. So, and we'll get back to United Hatzalah after October 7th. October 7th changed everything for everyone, okay, and including United Hatzalah. And then around the same time, the early 2000s, my best friend from college, we were Williams 94, John Fielder, he called me and he said, as you know, I'm a Christian. I said, yeah. I didn't realize at that point what I know now. When someone says they're a Christian, that it means a faith commitment. It's not it's not just like you're born that way. It's a commitment. So he said, as a Christian, I'm a Christian. He said, I could be doctor number 700,000 in the U.S., or I could be the indispensable source of care for people then who were dying of AIDS, which is happening all over Africa. And so he said, I feel called by my Christian faith to go serve those who are being ravaged by AIDS in Africa. So he went to Kenya, and he's been there ever since, in Kenya, Malawi ever since. And then when PEPFAR, which is the greatest American humanitarian program since the Marshall Plan, when PEPFAR was instituted by President Bush in 2003, John was really one of the more experienced AIDS doctors in Africa at that point. And so he was traveling throughout Africa helping administer PEPFAR. Because he was really, even as a young man, was one of the best HIV and AIDS practitioners. So, in the course of his journey, he realized that the biggest humanitarian problem in the world was the lack of access to care for almost everybody in Africa. Where in Africa, in most countries, there's one doctor for every 30 to 50,000 people, and there's probably no hospital that's functional for most people, and which means that, if it's just devastating, whether the condition is maternal care, whether it's HIV, whether it's your daughter broke her leg, whatever it is, there's often no care. And he said the only people who are actually providing the care consistently, reliably, and really effectively were Christian missionary doctors. And he said they used to be supported more by their denominations, but as Protestant Christianity became more non-denominational evangelical and less focused on the denominations, the denominational support waned. So we decided to set up our organization, African Mission Healthcare, to partner with Christian mission doctors at Christian hospitals all throughout Africa to do three things, which is provide clinical care to the poor, and that's everything from HIV care. And HIV is now managed. I mean, you go to these African hospitals and you see the sign for HIV and there's nobody there. It's because they come to pick up their meds once every 3 weeks, go home and come back. It's a managed disease now, thanks to PEPFAR. And but everything from HIV to maternal care, we do a lot in maternal care, to surgery, which is the surgery and maternal care, the 1 and 2 great unmet needs in Africa right now. There are well over 100 million people who need surgery in Africa right now. And the math explains itself. All of us will need surgery on average once every 20 years. If there are no surgeons around and no anesthetists around, or far too few, the surgical deficit builds up, and it's catastrophic. So we do a lot of surgery, training of surgeons, a lot of maternal care, all partnering with Christian missionary doctors at Christian hospitals. And in so doing, I was able to really become very close with the evangelical community. And as Julia said, one of the things I'm proudest of is being known as the evangelical's best Jewish friend. So this really, early on really helped create, sustain, and strengthen relationships with evangelicals. And I would say, all the giving that I do to African Mission Healthcare, I do it as a Jew. And, and I do it really in the context of something that came from my book on the Haggadah, which is everyone who's been to a Seder or has read Exodus knows that after the 10th plague, the Jews put blood on the doorposts, right? So the question is, why do we put blood on the doorpost for the 10th plague? Anyone have any ideas? Why do we put blood on the doorpost? There's some theories which I think are incorrect, and there's one theory that's right. Why do we put blood on the doorpost? So the prevailing theory, like the Hebrew school theory, is you put blood on the doorpost so that God will know which homes are the Jewish homes, right? But God knew which homes were the Jewish homes in the 9th plague because the Jews were exempted from the 9th plague, the plague of darkness. So unless God forgot between plague 9 and plague 10, that can't be it. So why is it? I think it's to teach us that why a doorpost? Because a doorpost is where you go in and out of a house. So teaching us that when you go in and out of a house, you go in and out as a Jew. And when you go out, you remember you're a Jew and you act like a Jew. And when you go in, you remember you're a Jew and act like a Jew. And that was really the first lesson that we got as we were about to become a free people en route to the Promised Land, was you go in and you're out of your house as a Jew. And I think that's a particularly important lesson to remember in these times, is that that's who you are. And that's why we have mezuzot. And that's really the first lesson that we learned in the Exodus. Anyway, so I try to apply that to our giving. So we gave a significant gift to African Mission Healthcare 2 years ago, $18 million, right? 18 wasn't a coincidence. And that was just one of the gifts, but we knew that one it was the largest gift ever given to Christian missionary activity, at least in Africa, for medical, maybe more broadly, but we wanted it to be known as 18, so that it would be known that we did this as Jews who were fulfilling our Jewish obligation to love the stranger. Anyway, so we do everything we can as Jews, and really in honor of what we learned in Exodus. So African Mission Healthcare, it continues to grow. I mean, people, and we're blessed with an incredible team on the ground that really knows not only the specific needs in each of our hospital partners, but also how to implement it. And so, for instance, people called us during COVID and they said, how can we help in Africa during COVID? And we said, well, there's no oxygen in any of the hospitals. And COVID patients are really oxygen consumptive. So if COVID hits here, which it didn't hit in Africa. Now, why didn't it hit in Africa? This is March of 2020, April. We were really worried because there was no oxygen in the hospitals. There's nothing you can do to treat an oxygen-consumptive patient if there's no oxygen. So, but it didn't hit Africa hard because we learned later, like a few months later, everyone learned that COVID really went after the elderly. And there are very few elderly people in Africa because the healthcare systems are so bad that there's very few people my age and older, and even fewer 65 and older. So that kind of illustrates the extent of the problem that we're trying to solve. And I could go on all night about our work in Africa. But so what do we do in response? So now we just built 6 different oxygen plants in Christian hospitals with the capability to send the oxygen to the outlying clinics. So we try to identify we have all these 14, 15 partners throughout Africa. We identify the specific needs at each partner. We develop a long-term plan, and we fulfill it. And this is everything from building oxygen to providing the first residency program in the country of Burundi to really funding and running the only hospital serving 2 million people in the Nuba Mountains, which is the stateless area between North and South Sudan, which is really run by a man who will be a saint in the Catholic Church, Tom Katina, if anyone wants to look him up. There's a great New York Times profile of him a few years ago. And so that's what we do at African Mission Healthcare. So, and then I would say the third philanthropic endeavor I'm very involved with is Eagle's Wings. And Eagle's Wings is a parachurch ministry that identifies young evangelical pastors who have big church memberships, big social media followings, or big music followerships, brings these pastors on an 8-day trip to Israel, and then sustains them in a philo-Semitic and Christian Zionist community to follow. And it is the single best way to fight anti-Semitism. I mean, everyone asks, people don't get convinced by messages. How do we know that? Because in Exodus, God sends 10 plagues, including the slaying of the firstborn. What does the Pharaoh do after the 10th plague? He chases the Jews. So if God himself, with 10 plagues, can't convince the Pharaoh, it's going to be very hard to convince someone of anything with a Facebook message. So the lesson is people actually don't get convinced with messages. People get convinced through relationships. So when these evangelical pastors, and I've become very close with a lot of them, when these evangelical pastors go to Israel, they're in a community the trips are 30 pastors a trip, and they develop deep relationships with each other and with the Israelis they meet. And I was talking with Julie and Ryan about when you ask them in Israel, what's the best part of this? And it's a life-changing experience for truly all of them. But you say, what's the best part of the experience? They always say Shabbat dinner. Which I said, well, you can do that at my house in the Upper West Side whenever you want. You don't need to come here for that. But they said, no, it's just the relationships they develop, and the experience of Shabbat is the most meaningful part of the trip to Israel. And everything's meaningful to them, but that's number one. And but people get convinced through relationships. So by investing, getting back to ROI, by investing in a pastor's trip to Israel, which is fully loaded, $6,500, fully loaded, you have a young pastor who develops a love for the land and a love for the Jewish people and a love for the Jewish texts, and they come back and they share their newly found love for the land, love for Judaism, love for Jews with all of their parishioners, everyone they're following, which is an enormous number of people over time. And one of the pastors, this is typical. I mean, he's extraordinary, but this story is generally typical, is he fell in love with Israel, and he has a mega church in about an hour north of LA, and he now takes 6 to 7 trips to Israel every year with groups of congregants. And this is all after his one trip. And then he invited us to come lead a Seder experience, which was the Saturday night before Pesach this year, and it was the largest Christian Seder ever. But they're all doing Christian Seders. I mean, but it's this real love of Judaism, the Jewish people, the Jewish state, everything, and it spreads all throughout their realm of influence, which is intense in the church and also on social media and whatever other channels they have. Great investment, great friends. And I teach Torah to evangelicals every Tuesday at noon and on Zoom, and then several thousand pastors will download it, I think, to use in their sermons. And I teach it the only way I know how, which is in a very Jewish way, very textual analysis with an understanding of what the Torah really is, which is a self-help book. It's a guidebook. And it says this in Deuteronomy. It says this is for your benefit. A book for your benefit is what? It's a self-help book or a guidebook. So we go through the text, and we're very textual, and then we identify from each passage life lessons, all in a very Jewish way. And it's become a very popular session. And why is it? It's because there's right now a great reawakening where so many Christians are rediscovering their Hebrew roots, and they're discovering a love of the Jewish people, of Jewish teachings, of Jewish holidays. I mean, just being on this CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network email list, I've learned about Jewish holidays I didn't even know about. Shmuley knew about them all. But it's this profound love for all things Jewish. The Jewish state, I mean, you should see CBN on Israel in the last 3 weeks. But for them, predictable, because they've always had this great love for Israel. They've profiled Hatzalah many times. It's love for Israel, love for Jewish text. I remember the first time I met Gordon Robertson, the CEO of CBN. He starts telling Erica and I why he prefers Rashi over Rambam on this kind of issue. And I'm like, wait, how do you know all this? He looks at me like, well, I study every day. So it's love for the Jewish state, Jewish text, Jewish teachings, Jewish holidays, the Jewish people. And this is where evangelicals like Gordon Robertson of CBN and Robert Stearns of Eagle's Wings and millions of others are, and it's entirely new. This is entirely new. So there are historical continuities and there are historical discontinuities. This is new. And this has all been started, been cultivated, and is developing in my lifetime. And it's very exciting to behold, and I encourage everyone to participate in this great historic friendship. And I always tell them that whenever the opportunity arises, that there's a curse in the book of Numbers, and this is from the prophet Balaam. He's a mercenary. He just wants to do whatever whoever pays him wants him to do. And the King Balak tells him, go curse the Jews. And he keeps trying to do it, and it doesn't work out because God keeps stopping him. And then he tells Balak, he says, he's looking down at the Jews, and he said, there are people who dwells alone. And as Rabbi Sachs said, this is a curse, but that curse in our day has been lifted. We are no longer a people who dwells alone because we now have all of these Christian friends. And one of the great things that Eagle's Wings does, and that I've been able to do through the friendships I've made in African Mission Healthcare, is to really help cultivate and grow this Jewish Christian profound friendship, which I think has massive implications. All right, so let's getting back to Hatzalah after October 7th. So no one's life will be, you'll be able to, particularly Jews who are serious about their Judaism, broadly defined. There will be a life before October 7th and a life after October 7th. So October 7th, it's October 7th, I got a call, early that morning from Ellie, and Ellie has only called me on Shabbat. Oh, Ellie Beer. Yeah, so Ellie is he's the person I discussed earlier, who 20 years ago I met him at Wolf and Lamb, and he told me about the problem with Hatzalah, and he's really the founder, the visionary, and the guy who executed it, with now 7,000 volunteers and the most sophisticated first response system in the world. So it's all Ellie, and he's a truly great man. And the only other time I think he called me, I remember he called me on Shabbat once. It was 2014, and I remember looking at my kids, just thinking like, why would Ellie be calling? And he was telling me that there was an earthquake in Nepal, and he was, and the Hatzalah volunteers they were spending Saturday getting ready to fly out Saturday night to deploy to Nepal to see. I didn't know about the earthquake. He said there was an earthquake, and they were going to treat the victims of the earthquake, so we needed emergency financing to do that. So, so he doesn't call on Shabbat because he's Orthodox. He's Orthodox, and but he called me this Shabbat, and he told me what happened, and he said that at 6:20 in the morning, the calls started coming into our headquarters in Jerusalem, and originally they thought they were prank calls. No one could believe what they were saying. And then by the second or third call, they realized they weren't prank calls. And then by the late morning, Ellie had deployed, he had sent people to go grab all the volunteers out of the synagogues and said, Shabbat's over for you, you're going down south. And so he deployed 1,700 people, 1,700 volunteers, because the Orthodox Jews, of course, weren't checking their phones on Shabbat, but he went to the synagogues and pulled them out and sent them down south because there were lives to be saved. And so we had 1,700 volunteers down south by the late morning. And the first person killed was, so every big event in Israel, we have volunteers who are at the events, because you never know who's going to have we're at Meron, you never know who's going to have a heart attack or a heat stroke or choke, or whatever. You just always need Hatzalah volunteers at any big event. And so we had somebody at the music festival, and this was an Arab volunteer, and Awad, and he refused to seek safety for himself because he was just treating the Jews who were wounded, seeing who he could save, and then he pled for his life as a Muslim, and they killed him anyway, after torturing him. And then this volunteer didn't get killed for the following reasons. Another Arab volunteer, actually, and he got the call. He was down south. He didn't have to go down because he was living there. And so he got the call to rush out, and he had the good sense somehow to go back in and get the bulletproof vest that we had provided him. Because now we have a campaign to get bulletproof vests for everybody, but we had provided bulletproof vests to people who were in areas where they needed them. So he was in an area that needed one. So he went back into the house to get his bulletproof vest. I don't know how he had the good sense to do that. And he came out and went immediately to the scene, which was, a minute or two away, and got shot in the chest by the murderers. But he had a bulletproof vest on. And then they made him. Then he pleaded for his life, and to prove he was not a Jew, they made him recite verses from the Quran, which he did. And then they said, well, if we take him as a hostage, then the Israeli Air Force won't attack us, and we can kill while we're killing more Jews. And they tied him to a lamppost and shot him in the leg. And he actually happens to be a doctor. Very not that big a percentage of our volunteers are doctors. Our volunteers have to have certain jobs where they can immediately leave what they're doing and rush out to help a victim in need. And a doctor doing surgery, you can't just rush out. But he's a doctor. We have some, and so he was bleeding out for like hours, and thank God the Israeli commandos came and killed the terrorist before he died. So they rescued him and brought him to Soroka, and he's fine now. But yeah, so that and Ellie's wife, who I've known for 20 years, because Ellie got married at 18 or 19, and so they've been married since before I knew him and her. So I've known her since I've known him, and she's a paramedic and she's a volunteer. His whole family, his sons-in-law, his daughters, they're all volunteers. His son is now a medic in the Army serving. And Giddy, I've known her forever, and she's so well-spoken and friendly, and is a great evangelist for United Hatzalah. But she gets on. So we had this global Zoom call, which we called for 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on October 7th, because we knew we were going to have to raise a ton of money. We had to raise a ton of money because a year's worth of supplies were being depleted that day. Because we normally have a very careful inventory system, but Ellie and his colleagues said, empty the warehouses and send everything down south. And they also set up a field hospital that afternoon, which they knew how to do because they had deployed to Ukraine. And they had set up a field hospital on the border of Ukraine, Moldova. So they set up a field hospital. All the equipment was, and any other emergency response group that was there, like the IDF, they just take the equipment. And so we knew we'd have to replenish it. And it turns out it was all used up in 4 days. A year's worth of equipment was used up in 4 days. And so she gets on the call, and she can't speak. She couldn't say anything because she was traumatized by what she saw. And we now know the kinds of things that she saw and the other volunteers saw, but she couldn't speak. And she and the other volunteers, they rushed. The scenes were not safe. They rushed into the kibbutzim while there were terrorists there because there were victims that were bleeding out and needed to be treated on the scene and rescued. So she brought her gun. One gun was here, and the medical pack was in the other arm, and she and her colleagues, hundreds of them, went and treated huge numbers of people. Naftali Bennett said that he estimates we saved over 500 people that day. So that's United Hatzalah. So now, since October 7th, it's been just kind of a nonstop effort to raise the money to buy the supplies and the equipment, both that were depleted in the days that followed, but also for what's coming. And so the response has been kind of amazing. It's been really amazing. I mean, from individuals, of course, people who've been involved, as well as people who haven't been involved. I mean, Christians United for Israel called me that Sunday. They said, where do we send $250,000 to? I mean, all kinds of Christian friends of mine and Christian groups called, and companies, individual philanthropists, NFL teams, NBA teams. So it's been quite a lot of support. And so, when I think about, giving philanthropically, I always, particularly in this context, because we're doing like Zooms every day with with different groups of potential givers who become actual givers, as well as the team in Israel. And I say, like, none of us are going to turn old and say, my only regret is that I gave to United Hatzalah in 2023. So no one's going to say that. No one's going to say, I really wish I had that money back. And I said, like, this is the law of regret. If you know for certain that you're not going to regret something in the future, you should do it in the present. So I think people have been following that logic and have been really giving. I mean, my wife's speaking at an event right now in New York. There are like 700 people there. The hospitality industry is throwing. There's a technology event next week. We had a sports Zoom today at 12. I mean, it's just an outpouring of support because, it's the same thing with my work in Africa and our work in Israel. Without, no one should ever say it's only money. Because without money, our doctors in Africa and our medics in Israel would be working with Band-Aids. And they would be really saving nobody. So, United Hatzalah has this remarkable ability to turn money into supplies and equipment that they're deployed in the hands of people who can save lives, and they do it. And so those are really the three philanthropic commitments that we have, and it's been, so while it's been really gratifying to see the support that we've been getting, it's obviously been as disappointing to see the reaction on campus. I don't know how Yale's doing specifically, but in general. And this was a genocidal attack against Jews, and we saw it on October 7th. We being United Hatzalah saw it on October 7th, and in the days that followed, just how savage and brutal and absolutely evil these terrorists are, and it should be the clearest case in any of our lifetimes of good versus evil, and it's obviously not being received that way on many campuses and in their supporters and allies, I guess, in other places. And so we can talk more if anyone wants about theories as to why that may be, but that's just a fact that we're going to have to deal with, and that's why. I just think it's so important that Jews and our Christian allies, and as we have many, our Jews and our Christian allies just stand proud and stand strong, and be completely resolute, and never be intimidated, And courage isn't the word, right? Because what is courage? Courage is Ellie's wife, Giddy, who's going into a live terrorist scene with a medical bag in one arm and a gun in the other as a middle-aged woman, never had any army experience, with terrorists there who want to kill her. But she knows that's courage. Courage is the 20 and people your age, this courage, going into the tunnels, the first guy in, the second guy in. Going into the tunnels. That's courage. Not that courageous to have to, argue with some idiot, or just be proud of who you are, or speak up for what you believe in. That's just that's what we all have to do. That's table stakes. We can all do it, and there are communities like this that are very supportive, and it's just incumbent on everyone to stand up for the truth, to stand up for the Jewish people in this time of great need. And there's another great line in Exodus where Moses has a staff in his hand, and God's point is everyone has a staff in their hand. So everyone has a different staff, but everyone has a staff in their hand. It's like everyone can do something, and what anyone can do will differ as he or she gets. It will differ as he or she gets older, but everyone can do something, and everyone can do something significant. And the staff in your hand, it'll be different at different stages in your life. It's different for different people at the same stage in their life, but there's always something. And I'm not going to say it's courageous because, it's what they're doing in Israel is courageous. But, each of us have a staff in our hand. And whether it's regards to Israel and the Jewish people now or something else in another context, it's always important to say, what staff did God put in my hand? And how can I best use it for his glory? And that's the question which everyone should ask and answer, really at all times. So we can certainly talk about why there's this reaction on campus and otherwise, not just campus. How many people in London were marching? How many people in New York? How many people in Sydney? We can certainly talk about that. But I did say I would talk about dating advice from Genesis. And I don't want to forget that. Right? So, okay. So is it all right if I segue dating advice from Genesis? Okay. What's that?
Not light.
But this is actually not light. This is actually pretty serious. But all right. So, all right. So, and the rabbi can correct me if I'm wrong. But okay. So, the great courtship story in the Bible is between Isaac and Rebekah, right? And Isaac and Rebekah enjoy the happiest marriage in the Bible, right? It's not a perfect marriage. We can go into why. Maybe this isn't the right venue for why not. But that's a whole separate section. But it's not the perfect marriage, but it's the best marriage, right? You look skeptical.
I'm listening.
Okay. He's thinking, what marriage is better? Not Moses and Zipporah. All right. Who else you got? No, nobody. All right. So, it's not Jacob and Leah or Rachel.
I'm having nostalgia about when you were dating Marc.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well. All right. So it's Isaac and Rebekah. All right. So how did they become the best marriage in the Bible? Well, it begins with the courtship. So Abraham sends his servant to go find a wife for his son. Right. Isaac had reached an age long beyond when he should have been married, but he had been traumatized probably by the Akedah. So Abraham sends his servant out to find a wife, and his servant identifies two things in the woman, who's Rebekah. He identifies just two things. This is important. He identifies only two things. He identifies that she's beautiful, and she says it's definitely physical beauty. He says she's beautiful, and she's ridiculously giving. She brings water for him and for all of his camels, and it would have taken dozens of trips with heavy water in order to take care of him and his camels. So she's an extremely generous person and a beautiful woman. And then he says,
The animals is key.
"What? Yeah,
The animals is key.
right." But it shows her commitment. She was such a generous person. Like this stranger's animals needed water. She took probably estimates like 25 trips with water to. So she's an extremely generous, giving person and a beautiful woman. That's all he needs to know. He says, "You are the perfect woman for Isaac." And then she says, "Will you come with me?" And she only knows two things about Isaac. She never met him. She'd met the servant, but she never met Isaac. But she knows two things about him. One, he's a good provider, because the servant said about all that he has to offer her materially. So he's a good provider. And two, that he loves God. He's a man of faith. That's all she knew, is that he's a good provider and he loves God. All the servant knew was that she was beautiful and was very generous. And then we see 4 things happen. So then they decide that they're going to get married. They identify 2 things. That's it. Just 2 qualities. Okay, you see where we're going with this? They identify only 2 qualities. And then they make the decision. And then it says they get married. Getting married is obviously just kind of a legal commitment. And how do we know that? Because then it said she became his wife. So becoming a wife must be different from being married, or else it wouldn't have broken it out. So they decide to get married. They get married. She became his wife, and then he loved her. It's in that order, right? So basically, what is the courtship advice from the Bible? First, that we can all apply. And the second half of each chapter of the book is how modern social science has proven this to be true. So this probably isn't the right venue just because of length. I mean, but it's been proven true. So the way to find a husband and a wife is right there in the Bible. How do you do it? Identify 2. All right, you can extend to 3 qualities that you want in a husband or a wife. Okay, but that's it. No more than 3. And by the way, one of them isn't like she likes warm weather vacations, and he has a good sense of humor. Like, because dating actually has, what makes for a good girlfriend or boyfriend has little overlap with what makes for a good husband or wife, right? Little overlap. It's like if you want to be a golfer and you play basketball, okay, they're both sports, but they really have nothing to do with each other, right? So you got to identify the 2 or 3 characteristics which you really want in a husband or a wife. And there aren't that many to choose from, okay? But just so identify the 2 or 3. Maybe there are like 6 to 10 to choose from. But the 2 or 3 that will make for a good husband and a wife, again, which is distinct from being a good girlfriend or boyfriend. There's some overlap. Like a good girlfriend or boyfriend might be giving and generous and nice, and that could be a spouse quality too. But, he likes this kind of music, or, that doesn't matter. Or I love her friends. That doesn't matter, right? 75% of what a married couple talks about is their kids anyway, right? So identify the 2 or 3 characteristics, and really talk to your friends about it. Talk to your rabbi or your priest or your pastor about it, and it's not that complicated. There aren't that many to choose from. But say 3 max, then get married. Young, okay? No long dating. Why, if you identify 3 characteristics, why do you have to date for a long period of time? Right? Just identify the 3 characteristics. He's got it, she's got it, boom, get married. Then become a spouse. What does it mean to become a spouse? It means to do spouse-like things, like be generous, be giving, be invested in him or her, and we know that from Genesis 2:24. Really, what it means to be a spouse, which is when God makes Eve for Adam, He says, "I will make not a helpmate," which is a really bad translation, but a help against him. So which means help against him, right? So it's someone who will lovingly want to improve the other person, right? So the first thing, identify the 3 characteristics, get married, become a spouse, and then love will follow, which is the opposite of the Western romantic notion. The Western romantic notion is first you fall in love. And falling in love, and Shmuley, this was our mutual friend Rabbi Moshe Shiner's point, right? You don't fall in love. Like, you might fall on your face. Like, you might fall down. Like, you don't fall in love. It's a totally stupid expression. Like, you rise to love. You don't fall in love. I mean, so forget falling in love. So the Western romantic notion is first you fall in love, which is, we know this is going to be bad because it's a ridiculous notion, right? So at first you fall in love, and then you play house or whatever, and then you decide to get married, and then you enjoy a 50% divorce rate, which understates it. Because 20% of couples who are separated for 10 years are not divorced. This is the concept of endless separation. So why would there be endless separation? Let's say, like, she's on his health insurance or he needs her Social Security and they don't hate each other. Okay, so just stay married, live apart, stay married legally because the exit costs are too high. And you can date, apparently these dating apps, they have sections for this, like legally married but not really. But it makes perfect, I'm not even criticizing it, it makes perfect economic sense. Like, right? Like if you don't hate each other, it's often economically, you can live in different houses, but the point is that it doesn't show up in the divorce statistics, right? Because if you look at the statistics, you think it's a happily married couple, but 20% of couples who are separated for 10 years. So The marital unhappiness rate is very high with the Western romantic notion. Whereas if you look at we do have data too on the biblical notion, which is, what you could say Isaac and Rebekah is what would now be known as arranged marriage without coercion, right? And actually that describes more than 50% of the marriages in the world right now. Arranged marriage without coercion. Shmuley, you and Toby probably had something similar, right? Arranged marriage without coercion. Like how many dates did you have?
5.
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
3?
Right.
I was hooked on the second week, though. You guys took another week.
Right. No, but you lived it, right? You live what we're talking about.
Yeah, but it wasn't arranged.
No, but it wasn't.
Arranged.
Depends how you define arranged.
Yeah, so it wasn't you're going to marry that person.
No, but that's
this misnomer, misconception. About
right. No, but
Orthodox are not told who to marry.
no, but without coercion means you're gonna meet her and you haven't, and it's a presumption that you're gonna want to marry her.
Not necessarily. No, you're introduced. I think people should know that in the Orthodox world and the ultra-Orthodox world, I'm not talking about 100 years ago, but today,
Yeah.
even in the ultra-Orthodox world, you're introduced to date, and if you choose to go ahead with it, you go ahead. If not, you move on to the next one.
Right, but you don't do that for 15 years.
No.
Right.
You do it for 15 minutes.
Right. No, but that's why your kids get married in their early 20s.
Yeah, that's why most of us stay married.
Right, that's why most stay married. So my advice is. Right. So my advice, and look, I'm a pretty secular guy, right? I don't like the term secular religious for a variety of reasons. We can discuss it another time. But whatever. My wife's a Reform rabbi. Okay, so that's where we come from. My podcast was known as the Rabbi's Husband, right? That's my proudest thing. I'm the Rabbi's husband. She really hasn't believed it in Rabbi's husband, but I'm a Rabbi's husband, right? So, so that's where we come from. So, but from a secular scientific point of view, the Bible has it exactly right. Identify 3 characteristics that matter. Get married, and that certainly implies getting married young because it doesn't take a long time to identify the 3 things. So identify the 3 characteristics, get married, do spouse-like things, then you will experience love. And then, by the way, that kind of love deepens every single day.
Yes.
And then, so
You got damn lucky, Mark, with her.
yeah, no, I certainly did. I got lucky, or I don't believe in luck. I believe in God. Good, has a hand in these. Yeah, but exactly. I certainly did get lucky or providential, whatever it was. Luckiest guy in the world in that regard, no question about it. But and we dated for like 7 weeks, but yeah. I had the ring in 5, but then she was getting she's getting ordained as a rabbi, and an Israeli said, "You don't mix simcha with simcha," which was wisdom. Yeah, because just let her enjoy the moment of her ordination, and then give her another moment. That's the idea behind it, right? So anyway, so I had the ring in 5, but you identify the 3 things, and then it begins. And the divorce rate among arranged marriages without coercion is very low, 4 to 5%. Anyway, so that's the dating. But now getting back to so let's just take questions on anything. The dating, sure, but we can talk about Hatzalah, African mission, healthcare, business, or really the romance obviously is relevant to where I presume most of you are at or approaching. So also, but where you are on campus right now, like what's going on and how to deal with this. So we have some perspective on that as well. So any kind of questions or comments?
Would you mind maybe just giving your perspective about why we're seeing this wave on the campuses?
Yeah, sure.
And be just totally honest about your perspective on it.
DEI. DEI is the head of the snake.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, of course. So what's the logic of DEI? The logic of DEI is that the world is split between oppressors and oppressed, and perpetrators and victims. And when you split the world that crudely and that incorrectly, the Jews are going to get the short end of the stick every single time. How do we know that? We know that because what was the great innovation of Israel? The great innovation of Israel was we will never be victims again. Right? Never. There's no virtue in being a victim. No virtue in being a victim. We will never be victims again. And so when DEI splits the world between victims and persecutors and oppressors and oppressed, and we say we're never going to be victims again, we're going to be hated. And now how do we know that's true statistically? Because I always like to go back to the data. How do we know it's true statistically? 2 years ago, there was a study that came out of the political, religious, and social beliefs of DEI professionals. I use professionals in quotes. Let's say DEI bureaucrats, which now there are so many at these colleges. University of Michigan, I told some of my friends who have kids at Michigan and who went there, I'm like, you're number one in the country. They're like, at what? I'm like, at DEI professionals. 163, according to the study. Full time. What are they? So I don't know how many Yale has. Probably a lot. And all right, but what's the larger point here? The larger point is that so you have all these professionals and they're involved in every step of the way, but always separating oppressors and oppressed, persecutors and victims. And there was a study done about their beliefs, and it was a study of their tweets, of the public tweets of DEI professionals, and it showed they were obsessively anti-Israel. And that they commented on Israel way more than any other issue, and 96% of the comments were anti-Israel. This was 2 years ago. This is before now. 96% of the comments were anti-Israel. And it actually fit the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition of anti-Semitism, which one of its components is obsessive anti-Israelism. And like, why are they commenting on Israel so often, and why are they commenting on Israel so negatively? It has really very little to do with their jobs. And this was 2 years ago, and it actually fit the international definition of anti-Semitism. And now that this ideology is so pervasive and persistent in the universities, it was established 2 years ago that there was this huge problem with anti-Semitism among the DEI people. And nothing was done about it in any of these schools, nothing. And now here we are, and we see so much hostility. Hostility is one thing, acquiescence is another thing. So, the acquiescence reminds me of Yehuda Bauer, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, and he became a scholar, and he spoke at the German Parliament in 1969. And he said, as a representative of my people, I have 3 more commandments to add. Thou shalt never be a perpetrator, thou shalt never be a victim, and thou shalt never, ever be a bystander. And people who are bystanders, and people who are acquiescing in this anti-Semitism, who aren't saying very much because they don't want to alienate this employer or that friend or this group, they're bystanders, right? And one of the lessons from Jewish history, but not just Jewish history, one of the great lessons is never be a bystander. So whenever you see, Martin Luther King, as usual, put this more beautifully than anybody else did and taught us so much as the greatest American in the 20th century, that that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and bystanding against injustice is a form of injustice, and that's one of the great things that Martin Luther King taught us, is that you can't be a bystander. Well, you can be, but it's absolutely wrong to be a bystander, so I think DEI is a real problem, and. When you and I think it's everyone should just resist it. Don't be complicit in it. If it's someone asks you your sexuality, it's no one's business. Someone asks you your race, it's not relevant. Someone asks you your gender, can't you tell? It's just we should not be complicit in this. We should not be complicit in separating people based upon their race, their gender, their sexuality, anything else. And yet the whole infrastructure of a lot of these universities is based upon that. So I think that only explains that explains the university reaction, because that's where DEI is most intense. Although of course it's not like it doesn't exist anywhere else, because it's a cultural phenomenon, a political phenomenon that exists many places, but particularly at universities.
Mike, yeah, so if you can ask a question, we're going to pass. How many mics do we have on the table?
We have 2.
Where's one? Where's the other one?
Ryan.
Okay, so we'll send one this way, someone that way. Just raise your hand, and we'll pass the mic to the closest person with their hand up for questions.
Yes.
A round of applause for Marc.
No, please.
I'm Aaron Goldstein, a second-year MBA in the School of Management. Thank you again. In the last couple of weeks, I've had numerous discussions with classmates and professors who are frankly outraged, right, by the university's response. Mm-hmm. They feel that, even at Yale, who's a preeminent academic institution, we can't even talk about these things in the classroom. It's been kind of silenced in a lot of ways. I know in one of our classes, we have a lecture on Israel and Palestine that got pulled from the class this year. And we're trying to figure out ways to actually open up the conversation respectfully in our communities. And do you have any suggestions on that? And have you experienced similar things in your communities?
No, it's a good question. I would say the first thing, like, what does the Bible tell us more than anything else? I think it's 86 times it says, do not fear. 86 times, do not fear, more than anything else. So the first is, and as we discussed before, there's no grounds for fear here. I mean, this is such a lovely place. I mean, there's no grounds for fear here. I mean, and so yeah, open up the discussion, have the discussion, and don't be intimidated by anyone or anything. And you know that the truth is on your side, and speak it proudly, speak it with data, speak it with evidence, as I'm sure you do, and I know you have, and speak it. And I would say more generally in political conversations on campus, I would say, you know, one of the things that, let's say DEI broadly defined, but even more broadly than DEI, it's just, where's the poor in all this? Where are the people who are genuinely in need, who are, like, all these people who are concerned with these kinds of issues, the DEI broadly defined, like, why don't they ever come to us to see if they could help in our work in Africa, you know, or our work in Israel, when we're really treating the sick and the injured and try to identify those who are genuinely the stranger. You know, who's the stranger? The stranger is the person in rural Burundi who there's 2.2 million people with the only surgical team is the one we support. Like, why aren't they? Like, where are they? We never hear from them. And we knew this for a long time. And so I would always, you know, maybe this is less relevant to the discussion on Israel right now, but to this ideology more broadly, just bring it back to, there are people in genuine need. There are people who have no access to health care, no access to decent education. It can all be provided, and it can all be provided at a reasonable cost, and there are people and groups doing it really well, but why aren't you focused on them? Like, why? I don't know. I mean, it's just, yeah, I mean, to identify people in genuine need and to provide them with real help, whether you do it domestically or internationally, it's really not that hard to do. And they don't do it. And so I think it's always, as Jews and as Christians, you know, we all have the same sacred text, and, you know, the Bible tells us to love the stranger, and I think it's incumbent upon us to first identify, you know, who are the strangers I can love. And love is, my friend David Wolpe, I don't know if has he been here? Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, David always says that, you know, love in the Jewish context is an enacted emotion. In other words, it only exists in action, which makes a lot of sense again. You know, you know, imagine saying to your spouse, like, I love you, but never do anything loving. The relationship's not going to go that well, right? So, but, you know, you think about how do I fulfill my Jewish obligation, my Christian obligation, whichever it is, to love the stranger, and how do I do it most effectively and most efficiently and most profoundly? And I would always challenge ourselves to answer that question and challenge others to answer that question. And I think that's a fundamental question right from the Bible that we have to ask ourselves and ask others. But in the meantime, just never be intimidated by a conversation. Never. I mean, if you lose friends over it, you should never have had those friends to begin with. You don't lose anything. And by the way, you'll gain real friends. There's nothing to be lost. There's nothing to lose.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm a third year at Yale College. I'm from South Africa and worked this summer in Kenya and watched a C-section being performed by someone who's trained by African Mission
really?
African Mission Healthcare, or was funded by.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And
in Kenya?
Yeah. And I was wondering, just coming back and mentioning kind of like, as you were saying, how does a person talk about those kind of real issues or the reality of suffering in a different place without exhausting people?
Without what?
Exhausting people, and without it being like another thing that you see on the news that's really difficult, but is so far removed from lives here that it's really difficult to express or show people ways that they can get involved.
That's an awesome, truly awesome question. All right, it's a very fundamental question. one, just bring it back to the essential humanity of each person. So, and you can give examples. And I love the example you raised. We do a lot in maternal child care. And we're now building with a nun, who's a nun, and she's the best OB in Uganda. And incredible story. I mean, they all have incredible stories, but her, Priscilla, Sister Priscilla in particular. But so in Uganda, and this is typical, number is fairly typical throughout Africa, if you need a C-section, you have about a 20% chance of being able to get one. Now, my wife had 4, right? And but in New York, it was like if you need one, I mean, so what happens if you need a C-section and you don't get one? Well, you might die in childbirth, which is why 1 in every 38 women in Africa will die in childbirth. If you survive, you will have either a fistula or a birth injury, which means the woman will defecate and urinate through her vagina until she can get the surgery, and there are no surgeons around. That can be never, or, I mean, Sister Priscilla is treating women who've had these injuries for 40, 50 years in some cases. And they're persistently leaking, persistently. I mean, so for $350 to African Mission Healthcare, we can get that woman a C-section, or if she needed a C-section at some time in the past and didn't get it, we can repair the birth injury for $350. So if someone's exhausted by it, I would challenge them, be like, you shouldn't be exhausted by it. Like, you're hearing about it, this person's suffering it. Like, and you can do something about it. You can help this woman, I mean, the improvement of her life, imagine. I mean, none of us can actually imagine what it's like to have a birth injury like that and to live with persistent leaking of waste because you didn't get a surgery, which 100% of people here in the US will get if they need it. But that's the reality of Africa, but the reality can change, and Sister Priscilla is changing it. The people you saw in Kenya, which was maybe a Kajabi or Mau or a few other places that we're very close with, it can be done. And sometimes people say, well, is healthcare scalable? I'm like, well, if your daughter broke her leg, forget the birth injuries. If your daughter broke her leg, would you be like, well, I don't really want to help her because there are other people whose daughters broken their legs and they can't be helped? No, you'd rush her to the hospital. I mean, and so why not rush someone else's kid to the hospital? I mean, it's the same thing. And by the way, healthcare is scalable. It's not a very good argument considering Mount Sinai has fundraisers. So if Mount Sinai has fundraisers, it means Mount Sinai is not sustainable, and Mount Sinai is not scalable because if there's a patient in need, whether my son had appendicitis a year ago, Mount Sinai did a great job. He was fine, out the next day. Healthcare needs a doctor, an anesthetist if it's a surgery, nurses, lots of other things, oxygen, lots of other things in the system. But yes, the patient needs someone tending to him or her every single time. That's healthcare. So to the extent you can help. One of the reasons why we gravitate to maternal child is because when you think about ROI, like you're saving a young woman, a child, and you're bringing a mother back to her other children. So like for $350. So it's like it's an incredible investment. And we worked very closely with Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana. We're here from Louisiana. He's a great man. He's a doctor, and we worked very closely with Senator Cassidy, and we got hundreds of other congressmen and senators over the summer to work on legislation, which got announced by the Secretary of State in August, because what we noticed was that there were all of these pregnant women who were testing positive for HIV. It's like, well, why is and transmitting 130,000 kids a year being born with HIV in Africa. So we're like, well, why is that? Because PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, has been so successful in treating so many people with HIV. So why are all these pregnant women testing positive, particularly in countries where PEPFAR is strong? And the answer is, well, HIV is a slow-moving disease, so just like I might have cancer now, but I feel healthy, I don't know, right? But some diseases are slow-moving. If you get trauma is not going to be, but but HIV is. If someone contracts it tonight, they might not know for 4 to 5 years. So if someone contracts it tonight and they're pregnant in 2 years, they think they're healthy, but they're sick. So they don't go in for the HIV test because they feel fine, quite reasonably, but they're not. And then so the question is, why don't they go in for, why isn't HIV part of their maternal care? Well, there is no maternal care. or the maternal care is so bad that the women make a very rational decision not to seek it because it's not worth the expense of arranging for the transport to the facility because the care is so bad, so if it exists. So now we worked with congressmen and senators, and now PEPFAR is implementing a program of maternal child care for women in the areas that they're starting with, and HIV care will be a part of that. So there's a lot anyone can do, both just on a one-on-one personal level to help someone in need, and you know, it's. But you know, I think a broader answer to your really outstanding question is. So why does the Bible tell us 36 times to love the stranger, right? The Bible never tells us to love our children. Why doesn't it tell us to love our children? Because the Bible is not going to tell us to do something we're going to do anyway. No one needs to be told to love their children. But obviously, if it tells us 36 times to love the stranger, it's something we wouldn't do naturally, which is why it says you have to do it. Just like you might go to a doctor and he might tell you to do all kinds of things, but he's not going to tell you, whatever you do, go to the bathroom tomorrow. It's like, thanks, I'm going to do that. Right? Same thing. So you're only instructed to do things you otherwise wouldn't do. Right? And the Bible tells us 36 times to love the stranger because most people just kind of look in their immediate vicinity and do something in their immediate vicinity, but the Bible says, okay, charity might begin at home, but it doesn't end at home. Right? So therefore, you have to love the stranger. So therefore, it's incumbent upon all of us believers to identify who is the stranger and how can we love him in the way the Torah instructs us to love, which is through action. So.
Here, Eli.
Questions? Oh, that's a minute.
Thank you so far. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. I was talking with.
Your name?
Oh, yes. My name is Eli. I'm a junior at Yale College. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. Oh, yes. Is this not?
No, it's not.
Oh, it's symbolic. Okay.
Yeah.
Symbolic.
You're on your Zoom call with 8,000 pastors.
I'm
just joking.
It's a lot of pressure. I'll do my best. Okay, I'll speak up. So I was speaking with Jake earlier, who I believe is coming back soon, about how part of why it is so difficult. This is about college camp. This question
Right.
is about college
Okay,
campus
good, yeah.
Israel-Palestine.
Okay.
To flag it.
Right.
Part of why it is so difficult to have these conversations is that the download time to explain the pro-Hamas perspective, for whatever reason, takes 10 seconds, whereas the download time such that to like explain the argument fully and so that people can fully comprehend it takes 10 minutes or much longer. So we're fighting an uphill battle. And I absolutely hear what you're saying. I'm having these conversations myself, but I look on social media and I see just comments among comments. And so here's the question. I remember when the war first broke out, I was thinking to myself, we know that in a few days, the invasion is going to commence, and anti-Semitism is going to boom. And so before this happens, what can we do to mitigate this, to get in front of this? And I'm sure people were trying their best, but nonetheless, anti-Semitism boomed. Now I worry about a similar situation in that the war might escalate. We might have Hezbollah get involved. It seems like it's getting worse and worse. And so rather than seeing this already as something that is irretrievably bad,
Right.
I'm wondering if there's a way to view this as a moment of intervention. It's not bad. It's not irretrievably bad yet, the anti-Semitism. We can still do something about it. And so I'm curious, I know this is an impossible question, but if you were on campus right now, if you were directing people to have conversations on campus, what do you think would be the most effective way to combat anti-Semitism with all these dangers on the horizon?
Yeah, it's a great question. One, I was just thinking about what we were talking about earlier when people in March and April of 2020 said to us in Africa, what can we do about COVID? We're like, well, if there's no oxygen tanks, there's not much you can do. Forget tanks, I mean, really piped oxygen is what you need. They're much better than tanks. We pipe the oxygen into the tanks and then send the tanks to outlying clinics, but in the rooms it's piped now. But if there's no oxygen in the hospital, there's not much you can do to help a COVID patient, and which is one of the reasons why it was so disappointing when this study came out, confirming what everyone kind of knew about how the DEI people fit the internationally accepted definition of anti-Semitism 2 years ago, and nothing was done about it, including people who continued to support and applaud these universities as they were staffing up in a profession that was classified as anti-Semitic with data. It wasn't just like some guy said something and you make a generalization. It was data based upon hundreds and hundreds of people. So that's just a limitation. What else can you do? Well, another thing you can do, and again, they're very rarely like short-term fixes, right? But I think, create relationships with your Christian brothers, sisters, friends. Like it's, I think the pastors that I've been, so fortunate to know, like, they speak about anti-Semitism, and they speak about Israel, and they speak about Judaism in a way that deeply connects with their parishioners and their followers in ways that we couldn't, because they're not our parishioners, they're not our followers. And so, invest in these relationships, because at the end of the day, people are convinced, and I take this from a missionary I met in Tanzania in 2016. I was with him for a couple days, the late, great Marc Jacobson. He spent 33 years in Tanzania and retired to Minnesota and died of a brain tumor shortly thereafter. And but I remember in 2016, I was with him for a couple days, and I said to him, Marc, I've been with you for a couple days, and you're a missionary, right? He's like, yes, but I didn't hear you talk about your faith to anybody. Like, are you trying to, I think missionaries are trying to like win souls for Christ. He's like, yeah, we are. He said, but you can't do that until someone asks you one question. I'm like, well, what's the question? And Marc had been at that point like a missionary for 30 years. I'm like, what's the question? He said, the question is, why do you care so much? And what he was saying is, people's minds open once they know how much you care. So it's not going to convince someone in the moment, but it's when you build these relationships with Christian pastors, with Christian friends, really deep relationships, and you care about them, they care about you, they're able to communicate with audiences that we don't, just like we can communicate with audiences that they don't. So this is a very important friendship to build. In the moment, it's going to be hard to convince anyone of anything. I mean, if someone is going to form an opinion pro-Hamas, which is the General Lloyd Austin, who spent much of his adult life fighting ISIS, he said they're worse than ISIS. This is President Biden's defense secretary. He said they're worse than ISIS. If someone is going to come out pro-Hamas or anti-Hamas, which is the same thing, or be a bystander, and isn't going to devote the 10 minutes, maybe less, to, I mean, it's just, there's not much you can do. I mean, it's incumbent upon that person too has a responsibility. And that person has a responsibility to be intelligent in how they form opinions. And there's a limit to what you can do in the moment, except what can you do? You can speak clearly, proudly, authoritatively, and with data and evidence, and that's all you can do.
I want to add something. I'd like just to add to that question, because it's a question that's coming up a lot on campus. I think that Jews need to just say to their friends or their enemies at any moment of confrontation that the Jewish people were given the land of Israel. We're the oldest civilization in the world. It was given to us by God 3,700 years ago. It is the land that belongs to the Jewish people. We have tried since 1948 to share it with barbarians who want to annihilate us and announce that. So if you want to stand on the side of history with people who rape, behead, slaughter, kidnap innocent people, you're a barbarian yourself. You're savage. There's nothing else to have a conversation with you. There are 22, 23 countries in the Middle East. There are no Jews there because they've all been driven out of their homes. They don't believe in any of the rights or the values that we believe in this country as Westerners. They've moved anyone unlike them out. Israel is a democracy that has 1 million plus Arab citizens that live in their country. Israel has tried since 1948 to make peace with the Arabs and Muslims that live in their country. Israel left Gaza to try to give them autonomy and peace and a nation of their own. They built underground tunnels and for 2 years plotted the annihilation of our people. Go fuck yourself. And have a nice day. I mean, that took, what, 60 seconds, 90 seconds? Here's the next question. Everybody up, let's go, crowd. Yeah.
So hard to follow that as a question.
Yeah, I would,
Pretty dozen undergrad. I remember you. Go ahead.
I would just say one more thing to that, is that if someone's going to listen to the arguments, and again, if God can't convince a Pharaoh with 10 plagues, there's that. But everything they say they hold dear is embodied by Israel, right? I mean, Israel is the most, when all these data-focused ratings and rankings on the most gay-friendly countries in the world come out, it's always Israel or Australia, and a couple. Israel's always at the very top. Israel has women integrated in everything, from the military to business. Every value they hold dear, Israel embodies, whether it's gay rights, whether it's women's rights, whether it's, if someone is actually wants, you say, you know what, why don't you support the Arab unit United Hatzalah? We have 568 Arab volunteers. Who work hand in hand with the Jewish volunteers. Support them. See if they do. I appreciate these arguments are absolutely true, and I don't think they're going to convince the people you're talking about, because they just hate.
So I think that's an excellent segue to what is like an ROI in your breath. Right? You talk a lot about ROI. Sorry, David Light. I'm former undergrad at Yale and biotech entrepreneur. You're absolutely right that ROI is in everything, right?
Yeah.
Including, if you got money, give, great. Philanthropy, business, but also time.
Time,
is
exactly.
An incredibly valuable resource.
Totally.
And energy and so many questions about how do we try to convince people. And I fear that my hope is that there's a very loud minority and that are just idiots, right? There's no better way to describe it. Like, if you tell them everything that you just said in 90 seconds and you read any amount of history or facts or just look at the videos of what's going on, like, it's so obvious, and yet they're going in the opposite direction. So it feels like it's obviously a waste of your time and energy with that very loud minority, and my hope is that that is truly just a small minority. So my question to you is on the ROI. I'm very inspired by your connection to evangelical Christians. I think there's a lot of alignment as cultures. Mm-hmm. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors and came to Israel in '46 and scrapped everything together to build with their own hands a small apartment building. And were very particular about who they brought into their own building that they lived in. And one of their best tenants was an evangelical Christian that visited once a year and just had the apartment in case of rapture. And like, well, this is where everything's going to happen. I want my seat. And it's kind of a funny concept, but at the same time, there's so many alignments with the evangelical Christians, and it's a huge place for an ROI. But for especially at a university and with groups of people that are understand and alignment like here, what are other big groups, perhaps in all of your experiences, that are allies of Jews, where maybe they just don't entirely understand? Like, I've talked to a lot of Chinese people that are kind of, what's going on? And like that same amount of time that I spent talking to that person can completely convince them, and now they're real supporters, as opposed to trying to talk to some Twitter person that doesn't understand anything.
Well, I think that's a great point, and the people you're talking to, you're describing relationships. Like, you're talking to people you know and who want to know you better, and you want to know them better, right? That's a relationship. But with a Twitter person, there's no relationship. You're not going to convince someone with a message. You're going to convince someone through a relationship. And look, we've had more friends and potential friends than we have ever had. And that's among evangelical Christians in South Korea, and I believe in China, and I think in Japan. Like, every so often, the Talmud will become a bestseller because the word will get out, like, there's wisdom here for all of us. And we have huge numbers of friends and potential friends, and I think one valuable use of someone's time, David, you're totally right about ROI on time. And time is the most precious resource, and you're totally right. But one of the most valuable uses of ROI is to build genuine relationships and friendships with our Gentile friends, right? And our Gentile friends is not the person, marching at the god-awful thing that happened to Harvard yesterday. That's the video, front page of the New York Post. But that's our Gentile friends. and do it as often as you can. And I mean, just build these relationships and these friendships, and then they'll be some of the most enriching relationships in your life. I mean, the friends I've met, the pastors I've met through Eagles Wings who reached out to me. I mean, just yesterday or 2 days ago now, it was like the pastor I met. Everyone should go online. I could send it to Shmuel. You could forward it. Pastor Michael Fisher. He pastors the Greater Zion Church family in Compton. He went on his Eagles Wings trip to Israel. He gave a speech at the Tayelet, which is the best speech on Israel I've ever seen, at the last day of his first trip. And then he called me right after October 7th, and he did an Instagram Live with me. He did one with Bishop Robert Stearns, the head of Eagles Wings, with all of his followers as to what's going on in Israel. I mean, but these kinds of friendships and relationships that you can build in everyone's community. It's not only really good for Israel, really good for the Jewish people, but it's really good for each of the Jews who does it. I mean, it just brings an entirely new perspective, an entirely new set of learnings. And, you know, when my wife and I think about, you know, who's really enriched our lives, like it's a lot of our Christian friends, both the pastors that we met through Eagles Wings and also the missionaries that we've met through African Mission Healthcare. So I would say just build these relationships with people who are either friends or potential friends. And a lot of the pastors, they're potential friends. So the Eagles Wings will identify them as just successful, influential young pastors, and they might not know that much about it. They usually don't know that much about Israel. They know about it just theoretically. They say, you know, you have a big church, just come to Israel. You know, you're rising at your church, just come to Israel. And then that begins a process, and very often that process really culminates in something approaching love, or it actually is love.
30 more seconds. For those of us who don't have evangelical friends or aren't evangelical or aren't Jewish, I think we need to just remember that, just to add to what you're saying, Marc, is that we need to be educated. This is a university.
Yep.
We need to know our history, our ancient history, our history through the Middle Ages, our modern history, and what is actually on the ground going on today. Any informed, open-minded intellectual with a rational mind that looks at the facts today, it's black and white, what we're dealing with. It's the war of good against evil. We need to know our own history. We need to know the history of the Middle East, going back to ancient times all the way to today, and we need to be able to read and understand it and relate. And like you said, there are some people with whom you can have a conversation. It is probably a small minority radical group. This country is sane. The center of this country is silent because the center of this country is either indifferent to it because it's happening at the other end of the world, or understands it and just doesn't want to get involved. The way all groups don't always get involved with every other group, and they don't see it as their crisis. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in America is that it is becoming our crisis, because Hamas and Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda and ISIS they've been on these shores, and they're coming to these shores. I mean, they're in Europe. So we should just look around and see what's actually happening.
Well,
and so education. Jews don't have answers because Jews are ignorant, Marc. And I think we should talk to our friends in all communities. Hindus, Catholics, evangelical, Asians, atheists. Jews need to be, we're hiding, we're having vigils, we're scared. What are you scared of? What are you scared of? If you were gay, and somebody attacked you for being gay, you wouldn't be scared. You would say, I have the right to be what I am. If you're black, you would say, don't ever mess with my blackness. I'm proud of it, I love it, it's who I am, I know my history. And if you're Chinese, or you're Korean, or you're trans, or you're a woman, or you're any other subgroup of any kind, you would never, ever, ever bow down, or be scared, or go into the basement and figure out what to do with it. No, you go out, and that's what America's about. So we need to be educated, we need to learn and read and go back to the sources and spend some time to have the answers.
That's right.
And be proud to argue them and to share them with our friends. And this country's great, and liberty and truth, as you spoke all tonight about, truth ultimately is going to rise. America's going to shine again. This country's going to come back. We're seeing a radical moment. We're seeing a small minority. They're going to get arrested. They're going to go to jail. This kid in Cornell, the FBI picked him. I sent the Toby last night. Give it a couple of hours. This is a wonderful country.
That's right.
That kid's going to go to prison. Big smartass. Calling the threat to kill Jews. And his mom says he's depressed. Really? Half of Yale's depressed. We don't call in calls to go shoot and kill people. All right? Half the country's on antidepressant. I didn't hear about 100 million phone calls yesterday to slaughter Jews. Say, you're going to go to prison, little boy. You're going to go to prison. And then all these big for now are going to settle down. So we need to know the facts of our history. We need to study it. We need to share it. And we need to be loving and humble and kind and attach yourself to all the values.
No, that's such an important point, and I'm so glad you raised it. It's, the great Columbia professor from the early 20th century, Lionel Trilling, he wrote a book called The Moral Obligation to be Intelligent. Right? It was a collection of essays. That was one of the essays, but the title of the collection was The Moral Obligation to be Intelligent. We have a moral obligation to be, it's a moral obligation to be intelligent. Yeah, but just even the title of the essay, like it's a moral obligation to be intelligent. And what does that mean? It means that we have to be informed. We have to learn. We have to study. We have to know the data. You can't if you can win an argument at all, you can't win it without the data. And you can fortify yourself and fortify your communities at the very least, but only if you have the data, if you have the learning, if you have the education. And the education can be formal or informal. And we can take another lesson. We can always take lessons from the Bible. The Bible is full of lessons, but from this parsha, or last week's now at this point, when Abraham and Lot have to part. Like Abraham is Lot's uncle and his mentor, and Lot was behaving in such a way that they couldn't be together anymore. If Abraham can't convince Lot, and Abraham is the greatest teacher, the greatest mentor of all time, if he can't even bring his nephew along, you can't blame yourself for not being able to convince some idiot on campus. Okay, if Abraham can't convince Lot, don't be so hard on yourself if you can't convince some guy on campus.
Next question. Here. Oh, we're going that way? Aaron, introduce yourself, please.
So my name is Aaron Shore. I'm a senior at Yale College. First of all, I grew up in Jerusalem, Israel. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for all that you do for the people of my country.
Oh.
And my question is related to this, and it might be a little bit politically uncomfortable, so I apologize if it is, but I really feel like I need to ask it. Between United Hatzalah and MDA and Hadassah and all these other organizations that operate in Israel, a significant proportion of the social services we receive as Israelis is literally funded by philanthropists from abroad. And yet Israelis seem to know very little about this dynamic. And I think over the past few years, we've seen a dynamic in Israel among the kind of far right of demonizing the United States and trying to push Israel away from its strategic partnership with the United States. We have news channels in Israel breathlessly reporting on the downfall of American civilization, left and right, and Israeli politicians who have said very kind of upsetting things about the United States and really tried to damage that important relationship. And you've spoken a lot about all the work that you do to kind of bring the message of Israel to the United States. And I'm wondering, is there work that needs to be done to bring the message of the United States to Israel so that people understand the value of this partnership that is way deeper than just, on the one hand, it's not just the aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean right now that are protecting Israel from opening a second front. It's the work that is being done every day by people who straddle both societies to provide Israelis with things that they would otherwise not have.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, Hatzalah is entirely philanthropically funded. We don't get or seek any government support. The Israeli government doesn't. It's entirely philanthropically funded. The Israeli government doesn't support it, and that's okay. But most of our donors are Israeli, actually. Not most of the donations, most of the donors. So there's a huge number of Israelis who give consistently, and that keeps increasing. The rate of growth there is higher than any other group of donors. So the friends I've made among the many volunteers of United Hatzalah, they all love America. So and the United Hatzalah volunteers it's like the most diverse cross section of Israelis. It's secular Jews. I don't like the term religious. Haredi Jews, Arab Muslims, Arab Christians, Druze, everybody, men, women, of course. I've never seen anything but love for America. No, I don't watch Israeli TV. I don't speak Hebrew. I wouldn't watch TV anyway. But so I don't know what's said on TV or why. But just in terms of all the people I've met from a very diverse cross section, they love America. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Josh Lee, and I'm a sophomore in the college. I'm Asian, as you might be able to tell, and I do more work on my history and my knowledge, to attend lectures, etc. But I'm sure there's also other members here at this table who are, not Jewish or not Christian or from other ethnicities, and a lot of time from those different cultures, in my family and my community, in the Asian American community in Oregon, we were taught to keep quiet and to mind your own business. Don't get into stuff that regards communities outside of your circle. But as a friend of often many Jews and Christians, also Muslims and Arabs, we have to speak up and have to get involved in those things. And on Yale campus, my main issue is with the issue of kind of free speech. Free speech allows everyone to have express their thoughts, to talk about everything they believe in, and it really allows for both agendas of either pro-life or also pro-war, etc. From the Israeli-Palestine conflict between Hamas to be propagated. And someone I believe mentioned the download rates of Hamas, the support of Hamas download rate is extremely so much more faster than that of possibly the Israeli perspective. And that being able to be being spread through social media or through those subconscious waves to individuals like me or my community who have been taught to keep quiet about issues, it's a bit of a problem. Are there bad actors or amoral actors who spread agendas through using the idea of free speech as a tool to initiate kind of those topics? And how can we fight against that as just kind of people who don't have ancestral ties to the conflict, or and secondly who have to respect the idea of the freedom of speech, but also being narrow-minded enough to be able to dissect the most important parts and deliver the correct information to also our peers.
Yeah, well, I mean, what a good question. I think the first thing you're doing that's amazing is you're here, right? You're here. You're here at this time, right? So, and it's very much appreciated, right? As your presence is speaking for your friendship or of your friendship. So there's that. And but the attack on October 7th, of course, it was an attack against Jews and against Israelis. It was also an attack against humanity, right? And I think I always just bring it back to that. It's an attack against humanity. And I mean, what the United Hatzalah volunteers saw, which now everyone's seen in one form or another, I mean, it's an absolute just attack against it's as Shmuley said, it's good versus evil, and as Martin Luther King said, when there's injustice anywhere, it's a threat to justice everywhere, and everywhere means everywhere. So there's no notion of it was attack against this community, not that community. No, it was attack against good people everywhere.
I have a quick question. I'm Woody Mendel. I'm a physician here at Yale. A lot of those DAI's committees are headed by Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a significant liberal Jews component that are actually maybe even harder to argue against. Do you have any thoughts about that?
You're certainly right, and it's unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly the DEI committees, but even some of the people who are expressly anti-Israel are Jewish, and not a few of them, unfortunately. And it's just that. I was talking about this with Tal Kenan yesterday, our mutual friend Tal Kenan yesterday, and he told me to look up this guy who was head of the Jewish Association for Hitler or the Nazis or something in the 30s. I mean, this phenomenon has existed. Some of the most pernicious participants in the current debate are people who say, as a Jew, and then something god-awful. The fact that someone is Jewish doesn't qualify or disqualify their opinion. The truth or falsity of their words do. I think you bring up an important point, and look, it's why one of the reasons I oppose identity politics. Totally oppose identity politics. Like, the fact that someone is Jewish doesn't mean they should speak for the Jews. What do they have to say? I'd probably much rather have any one of our evangelical friends, speak about Israel. The fact that someone is Jewish it should never be a factor in someone's mind as to whether they take someone seriously in these issues. It matters, do they speak truthfully, accurately, from data with appropriate passion and with the right kinds of relationships, and that can be Jews or Gentiles.
And I would just add to that, the reason why we see a lot of Jews in DEI is because Jews have been the underdog in history, and therefore we join the groups that fight for the underdog. And the problem is when you fight for the underdog to an extreme, to your own self-destruction, that's where the problem happens. So these are people that start off with good intention, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion.
I don't give them good intention.
Some of them started with good intention. Some. And, or at least conceptually, or maybe from ignorance, it sounds like something that Jews should be fighting for. We don't just fight for ourselves, we fight for the minority. But the reason the Torah says to love the stranger, that God tells us the reason, is because we were strangers. We were slaves in Egypt. So we understand oppression in our history, and we've been the most persecuted people in the world. So it is a mission and a noble privilege and responsibility of Jews to fight for minorities, which is why we had the Uyghurs here. And I couldn't believe it. Nobody at Yale had done anything about it. Twice, this room was packed. I should send out the video. We're going to start releasing some of these tapes. And we were here with the people who are fighting for the Uyghur, the Muslim minority population in China. And Nuri Turkel, who's done unbelievable things fighting across the world for minorities in mainland China that are being persecuted in concentration camps for Jews. And we brought him here. We had a dinner. I don't know if anybody here was here. It was about 2 years ago. And it was jammed like this tonight, a night like this. And I asked him, I said, Adil, invited you to speak? He said, no. And then we had a second event for the Uyghurs. Last week we had the Zimbabwe. I wasn't here, but I hear it was an amazing event. As the human rights activist, leading human rights activist for Zimbabwe spoke here for a whole bunch of students. I heard it was extraordinary for people that attended the event. And so we've been doing this for years and years and years. And where is Yale? I don't know. Yale does a lot, but I think we have a responsibility to be at the forefront of fighting for minorities of all types, because that's what it really means to be Jewish. You have to say, you gotta love the stranger because you are strangers. And you're unique, and every people are unique, and every minority is unique. I think, unfortunately, the radicals among our own people they've lost their own sense of identity, their own self-pride, their own manhood, frankly. Like, just be a man. Like, just stand up. Like, be proud of your own, who you are, okay? And so, fighting for everybody else doesn't mean that you lose your own.
But I don't think he's talking about people fight. I mean, I think the people that you're talking about, I do not attribute good intentions to a lot of these people. And it depends on who we're talking about, but I'll give you an example of who I'm talking about right now.
You're talking about the extreme ones.
Well, extreme, yeah. I mean, Tal told me last night about this. I couldn't believe how bad this was, and I looked at the trailer, and it was every bit as bad as you said. This documentary, or I don't know what it is, I'm not even going to dignify that name, called Israelism. Anyone heard of this? You have? Oh, it's too bad. People have heard about it. You have heard about it? It's being shown?
A ton of campuses, yeah.
Oh, okay. Really?
Yeah.
I just heard about it last night. I saw the trailer. It is the most, just looking at the trailer, it is the most vicious anti-Israel blood libel you can imagine. Look at the names of the producers and the writers and the guests. No, they're just, I don't know if they're DEI, they're Jews. Yeah, every one of them.
Did it just come out?
Yeah, that's recent.
It's right now. You know what the name of the production company is? Tikkun Olam Productions.
But they were
I do not attribute good intentions to these people.
But we had American communists.
They want to destroy the Jews.
We had Americans in this country that were communists. We had radicals. We had the Weather Underground. I mean, there are radical groups in America historically that were against everything that America is, right? So.
And I don't attribute good intentions to them.
No, I'm not saying that they're good intentions, but some of them start with good intentions.
Maybe.
And the extremists have to be knocked out. Listen, I called today for an excommunication of 10 American Jewish writers, and I sent it out. And it's going to go viral. I'm asking for the excommunication from the Jewish community of Thomas Friedman, Peter Beinart, Noam Chomsky, the people who run Justice for Palestine.
I wouldn't put Thomas Friedman in that category.
Good, great. That's exactly what I wanted. I want Thomas Friedman to say, how did I get in this group?
No, I don't think he should be, but that's another thing.
So we can argue. Let's argue who should be on the list and who shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But that's the answer.
No, he should not be in the same sense as Students for Justice and Palestine. Anyway.
All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
Next question.
Good evening. My name is Ellen Van Dyke Bell, and I'm a second-year student at the Divinity School.
Oh.
I want to actually make a quick statement and then ask a question, if that's okay. I certainly agree with you on certain points. I hold a lot of DEI positions, and I disagree with the DEI couch. You have, in every place you have good and bad, right? And part of the DEI is to address atrocities against African Americans in the history of this country, as well as injustices that go against the LGBTQ plus trans community. And so you do have good people in those positions fighting for the rights of oppressed. I am Jew-ish. I'm a Jew. My DNA dates back to the Levant. I'm also black, so I'm the descendant of two oppressed groups, and my experience comes from that. So that's one. Two, I know you have a lot of evangelical friends, but a lot of the evangelical white nationalist supremacists have done a lot of things like Charlottesville against Jews and blacks. And so one of the things that I do at the Divinity School, which is I think the reason why God has me there as I'm a rabbinical student too, is also to teach that lesson to Christians. And I started a group called Unapologetically Jewish, so I do all kinds of weird stuff. So that's why Shelley, we're good, because I stand up for that. But my question is this. I noticed that you kept talking about evangelicals and how it's important to partner with them. Mm-hmm. I had a vigil the other day. I also had Muslims, imams, priests, ministers, rabbis. Do you think it's important also to reach out to our Muslim brothers and sisters? Because I think if we have this, like you said, it's about having relationships, talking about the same pain. Mm-hmm. So they can go back to that community, or the people who are saying, hey, I support Hamas, because those of us who know Hamas also oppresses the Palestinian people.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's the story that also needs to be shared, not just by Jews and Christians, but it also needs to be shared by Muslims. And I didn't hear you talking about saying, oh, we should also incorporate that in the conversation, so I wanted to ask that question.
No, great question. I mean, yeah, I mean, of course we should be, I mean, I'm so glad you asked the question. Yeah, I'm glad you asked, and yeah, of course we should be engaging in relationships and conversation with Muslims. In fact, we had a Muslim author who was the chief imam of Ottawa was over at our home for Shabbat dinner a couple weeks ago, because he and I published a book with the same publisher, and he told me that the term imam actually means guide, very much like Torah does, and he said the first mention of imam in the Quran is regards to the Torah. So, so of course we should be having those conversations and explaining our perspective. But and in terms of Charlottesville, the evangelicals that I'm in relationship with, they would excommunicate any of those people. Like they would excommunicate them. They would deny they're Christian. I mean, they might call themselves Christian, some of those people, or they might not. They might just call themselves pagan. I don't know. But the evangelicals I know would identify them as pagans and as anti-Christian and unchristian. And they would kick them out as fast as they, I mean, immediately. I mean, immediately, authoritatively, and yeah, they're, yeah. So there would be a very sharp distinction between the evangelicals I'm talking about. I don't even know if those people are Christian. I mean, they certainly aren't Christian by the definition of, I mean, the missionaries I work with, the pastors I'm friends with, like they wouldn't call them Christian. They wouldn't acknowledge them as Christian. They're born Christians, say they're Christian, they'd be like, it's meaningless, you're not. But I really appreciate the question and the perspective. Where are you a rabbinical student? At Yale or?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know they had a rabbinical school there.
No, Divinity. The Yale Divinity.
Oh, Divinity, okay, yeah.
No, but I'm a rabbinical student at Olive Ordination.
At where?
I'm a Reformed Jew.
Oh.
But, I do Olive Ordination.
Oh, because my wife went to HEC down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom with us today.
Oh, thank you.
My name is Victor Abafe. I'm a dual MD JD student in my 1L year at the law school.
What kind of doctor are you going to be?
I'm interested in surgery, actually.
Oh, wow, great, okay.
And so, firstly, when you talked about like your work in global surgery, my
Yeah.
parents are from Nigeria. My mom's a family physician, very passionate about providing better care to the continent.
Mm-hmm.
But both there and on a wide variety of issues, I'm very much struck, I think, by like your global approach to like, problem solving and how you see humanity. So I just kind of want to understand like what aspects of your story kind of give you that like global aspect of how you see humanity, and also like what sort of texts influenced you in that way that you might recommend.
What a great question. Thank you for the question. Well, I would say, you know, at least my work in African mission healthcare and with United Hatzalah, it came through relationship, right? It was, look, if it weren't for my friend John Fielder, who's the missionary doctor in Kenya now, I wouldn't have even known about the work of Christian missionary doctors, let alone gotten so deeply involved with it. But it all came through relationship. It came through relationship, but also animated by the Torah's instruction to love the stranger. And, you can't love the stranger theoretically or emotionally or sentimentally. You have to love the stranger through action. And so I was like, well, this is it. If it's, it's who's the stranger? It's the people in the Nuba Mountains who Tom Katina serves, or the people in Uganda who Sister Priscilla serves, or, we could go through each of the countries. Like, these are the people who are otherwise forgotten, neglected, not cared for. And so I have a Jewish obligation to love the stranger. And John and the team he put together gave me the opportunity to fulfill that obligation in the most effective and efficient way possible. And so I'm forever grateful to him and to the others that he works with in Africa for giving me and the others who've come along with me into this cause to do that. But and when you think about the ROI, I mean, we talked about a woman in imagine a woman in Kenya or in Uganda, who needs a C-section and can't get it. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, my wife had 4 C-sections. It wasn't that big for me. It wasn't that big a deal. But all right, on the east side of Manhattan, it's not that big a deal, relatively. I mean, but imagine if you need a C-section and you can't get it, and you're going to die. There's some chance you die in childbirth. If you survive, then you live with a devastating birth injury for the rest of your life. I mean, the ability to help that woman, that's it's just such a gift that John and his colleagues have given me. So and the ROI, like, that's $350. Like, the ROI there's unbelievable. Like, there's no ROI like that. So if you look around the world for, like, where can I get the highest ROI for my philanthropic dollar, and the philanthropic dollar could be tens of millions, or it could be a few hundred. I could save a life with United Hatzalah for about 500, for about 300, 350. I could help this woman get a C-section while constructing the systems that enable more and more people in Africa to get more and more care. Because one thing in Africa, we can go into this later, particularly if you want to do global surgery, but you really can't do care by, like, some of these organizations, will set up a ship for 3 months and do, it's like, no. How about setting up a hospital so that someone who's sick or injured knows that no matter what their issue is, that hospital is there to treat them. Whether it's HIV, whether it's pregnancy related, whether it's surgical related, whether it's pneumonia, COVID, malaria, TB, whatever it is, you got to strengthen those hospitals. And that's what we do. And you strengthen hospitals by doing procedures and by caring for patients. And the numbers on really everywhere we work, but I was just going through a couple months ago, the numbers in the Nuba Mountains, where now there are 2 million people. I mean, the budget there, excluding the food last year, was 1.6 million, and we did, I think it was like 184,000 outpatients, 7,000 inpatients, 2,600 surgeries, 550 difficult births, plus leprosy, TB, malaria, and training for $1.5 million. So the ROI on that is unbelievable.
Hi, my name is Sandra Mendel. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you.
You have a really important message. One of the things that you said that I found was really important was the idea of we all have a staff that we carry, and that staff changes.
Right.
And I thought about that. So I have a law degree and a master's degree as a librarian. I'm the cook at Chabad on Fridays.
Wow.
So there's many things we could do, and if there's something that y'all could take, another little piece, nugget, that we all learned today that we could all take home. I think everybody's here and we're learning, right? You're all in academia and you're learning something. Remember, you have a Jewish soul and you have to nurture that too. So all that we learned today about, our old Torah and the stories in it, and how today it enlightens us and it teaches us things even about dating. Take that home with you.
Well, thank you so much.
And host a Shabbat, light candles, study. No one can take your education from you, and your Jewish education is just as important, and share that with the world. And thank you for all that you taught us today.
No, thank you.
It was a lovely talk.
I just want to close before I thank Marc. One more thing I want to say. So Toby and I have the privilege of having been here for 27 years on this campus, and not everybody who graduated Yale in 1998 ended up accomplishing what Marc Gerson has. And we've had, hundreds and hundreds alums that have come through this building and have spoken and shared ideas. So you ask yourself, like, what is it that allows a class of 225 or 250 people to graduate Yale Law School? And maybe 50% of them become associates or partners at law firms, make $2 million a year, work 120 hours a week, and, get excited by, maybe a small little, garage-sized house in the Hamptons next to their clients who live in the big mansions. Like, what's the critical, subtle distinction between, the others who maybe go out and work for 20 years to get tenure, and it's great, they want to be academics and they want to be great educators, but, and then there's like 10 in the class that actually changed the world the way Marc has, by building an enterprise, for-profit, by being blessed with an extraordinary marriage with an extraordinary woman, extraordinary children, and essentially dedicating his life to being able to write books, to hosting a podcast, to educating, to hosting. People always ask me, are we going to open a permanent space of Shabtai in New York City? And I said, as long as Marc Gerson's in New York City, I don't think you can, because Marc is the spot. Everybody knows Marc and Erica's house. It's an extraordinary household. And then to dedicate his life to philanthropy and to be very smart about tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars giving away and inspiring his friends on Wall Street and around the world to do it. So what is it? And so I want to humbly, just from experience, share something with you. Because in 25 years from now, we're probably thinking about where we're going to be, right? Like how far are we really going to go? How much of a real mark are we going to make on the world? You made it to Yale. It's probably the biggest accomplishment of your life. But is it the biggest accomplishment of your life? Is the biggest accomplishment of your life the fact that you got ahead of the guy next to you or the girl next to you in high school? And maybe randomly got in. Maybe randomly. Maybe they actually deserved it more. Maybe you were shocked that you got into Yale. Maybe, right? Because you knew there was somebody in the class that was actually smarter than you, and they didn't make the cut, right? And something happened in admissions with the file, and you had some story that you're from a refugee camp or something. I don't want to get into the whole thing, right? So you snuck in. You got it. And it's the biggest accomplishment of your life. And you ask yourself today, if you're not asking yourself this question, frankly, you don't deserve to be in New Haven. You should have gone to the other school. So what is it in 25 years from now? And obviously the first thing you should all pursue is the thing you want to do. Not everybody wants to change the world. Some people just want to be happy, and that's okay. And if that's what you want to do with your life, just settle down and be a school teacher, then go be a school teacher. And if you want to graduate Yale and you just want to play tennis for the rest of your life and make a living by being working in Starbucks or driving an Uber, and that's going to make you happy, go do it. But for those of you that are here that actually want to go out and make massive, fundamental, monumental changes in the world the way Marc has, I'll tell you what I think it is. Marc said before that there's going to be life before October 7th and after October 7th, as for us was before 9/11 and after 9/11. You don't remember a world where you walked into an airport and got on an airplane. TSA, it's a new thing. When I was a kid, we walked into the airport, we took our ticket, we walked to the gate, we got on the plane. Imagine doing that. Saved you 2 hours, right? So I can go on with the whole list of life before 9/11 and life after 9/11. There's going to be life before October 7th. There's going to be life after October 7th. And it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. The war is going to go on. They're going to have to eliminate Hamas. Hopefully they're going to knock out Hezbollah. And hopefully they'll go to Tehran, take out the leadership, have a revolution for the people of Iran, and end the nuclear program. Because God forbid if there was a nuclear bomb today in Iran, we would probably have seen already millions of people dead. So that's got to stop. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. And this is our moment. For those of you that are seniors, you got 7, 8 months left. What was it about Marc? Marc and the greats like yourself, who make the big changes. You're living in a moment, and you can either go back to your little cubby, a little room in the dorm, and pass your grades, and send your resumes to 50 firms and hope one of them gets a call back, and you get a job at Bain. You can do that. You can do that. Or you can take a stand, and you can say, you know what? I'm going to be brave, as Marc said. I'm going to do something. I have an idea. I have a vision. I have a passion. I know there's something going on in the world, and I'm going to do something. It's the simple act of saying, I'm going to do something about it. For those of us who make that small move, just to say, I'm actually going to do something about it. Brazen, proud, passionate, it could be a small thing. And I'm going to do something about it is the fundamental first thing that distinguishes between the leaders and the followers. The followers say, well, I'm just going to go on with life as is and let this wave pass us by. When Marc was at the law school, he said, he was at the law school. He had an idea. He was passionate about something. He saw a niche in the market. He saw a gap. He saw something that he could do that could change the way money was managed. Productively, better, for all the reasons. And he could have said, you know what, I gotta finish Yale Law School. I gotta pass, Marc, you failed the bar, right?
Failed the bar.
Marc failed the bar. See, I know the secrets. Marc failed the bar. Dude, hello, you listening friends, I love you all. Listen to this. He failed the bar.
It was very hard, though.
It wasn't. So my blessing tonight to all of us tonight. This is a great, great night. Thank you, everybody for coming. Fail the bar. Fail the bar. But make a difference in the world. Go with your passion. Go with truth. Go with conviction. Go with honesty. Go with love. Do something great. And you'll make a big difference. And you'll be back in a year, and in 5 years, and in 10 years, and in 25 years, and you'll say, I changed the lives of millions and millions and millions of people. Marc, you want to finish it?
Well, yeah, okay, yeah.
How many times did you fail?
Yeah, but you just,
Marc, how many times did you fail?
I just took it once and.
You never took it again?
No.
So you can't even practice law in New York?
No.
What are you going to do? Marc, what are you going to do?
Yeah, but no, I'll close with, because you mentioned working 120 hours a week or something, so it just reminded me of it, something that's in the book I just finished on how modern social science has proven the Bible to be true. So perhaps this is in the realm of what may be very relevant, like the dating, which is another chapter. So studies of workers from machinists in World War I to Twitter employees in 2018 has determined that if one works more than 55 hours, the productivity becomes less than zero. In other words, you start ruining some of the work you did. There's nothing to be gained with 55 hours. How many hours a week can someone who follows the biblical time formula work? 6 days you shall work, and the seventh you shall rest. So it's not really 6 days, because you can't work the full 6 day. Because you also have to anticipate Shabbat and prepare for Shabbat. So you can work 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and half the time on the fifth day. It's 55. I mean, it's exactly the number of hours you can work before you have to replenish yourself with Shabbat, as studies from machinists from World War I to Twitter employees in 2018 has confirmed. So getting back to what Shmuley was saying before, everyone should just study, learn, and start with the ultimate source, which is the Torah.